bloody freezing. It is. It's really cold. And here we are for book 6. Is it book 6? Yeah, it is. And that's this one, Ancillary Justice, which is my book by a woman. Now, I have a load of books by women in my 2015 Reading Challenge book list. And I also have loads of books by women in my bookshelf and in my to-read list. But because when I first picked all of these books that I was going to read for the Reading Challenge, I wasn't sure whether I would have time to fit all of them in. I picked specific ones that interested me. And I picked a book by a woman because I think it's extremely important that we showcase the fact that there are many, many awesome women authors, and I just wanted to take the opportunity to just shout out about women authors. Loads of them out there. They're freaking awesome. Enough of that. On to the book. Ancillary Justice. This one I wanted to read for ages. I heard about it and I read the blurb and the sample chapter on Amazon, and I was like, ooh, that looks interesting. It is wonderfully realised that there's such depth in all the sort of details, the religion, the peoples, their culture, and I love that. I mean, science fiction fantasy books generally do tend to go quite deep into world building, but there are some where it's a bit too world build by numbers for me, whereas Leckie gives you this really wide-ranging understanding of her peoples, particularly the Rutch. I'm hoping that I am pronouncing that properly. There's no glossary of pronunciations, so I'm about to make a complete plonker of myself, mispronouncing everything, just so you know. Okay, main character in the book is Breck. Breck is also one Esk of 20 and Justice of Torren. Justice of Torren is a warship for the Rudge Empire and is an AI, a ship mind, as it were. Now, what happens is, after an act of extreme betrayal, one Esk is separated from Justice of Torren and from the Esk and is on her own completely. When we find one Esk has renamed herself Breck, and it's 20 years later, and she is seeking justice, a justice seeking justice. It's one of the things I love about this book, because the term justice, when used for the warship, is nothing like justice. It's the Raj idea of justice. They go around annexing other human populated planets because the Raj believe themselves to be civilized and other peoples to not be civilized. In their language, to give you a slight clue of what they're like, civilized basically means human. So they are this very hierarchical and power and prestige driven nation, and Breck, one Esk, is after retribution, not just for Justice of Torren, and I'm not going to tell you why she's seeking justice for herself because that's a spoiler, and I'm not going to go too deeply into why she's seeking justice for this person either. This person is Lieutenant Orn, and Lieutenant Orn was a favourite of Justice of Torren's. These warships, they have favourites. They have people who they don't like so much, who find when they go on one of these warships that they're not treated so well, and they also have favourites. And Lieutenant Orn is a favourite because she is respectful toward one Esk. Now, one Esk is an ancillary. This is why it's called Ancillary Justice. Ancillaries are created during annexations, and ancillaries are human bodies used as puppets for the warship mines. Now, some of these ancillaries are always out. They are the Esks, and there are other names as well, but for now we'll stick with Esk, otherwise it gets complicated. And the rest of them are always in the hold in suspended animation. Now, the book itself follows Breck's sort of search for justice and also tells the events of the past. So we have one part of her story 20 years from when she was separated from Justice of Torren and she's seeking justice, and then the events that happened 20 years previously that caused her to have to go on this sort of quest. And at the beginning of the book, Breck finds someone called Sivarden in the snow, dying from hypothermia and injuries, and she rescues Sivarden and tends to her wounds. Now, this is another thing I love about this book. The ship minds refer to every gender as she, and several cultures also in the book don't have a gender pronoun for he. And I love that that's done, essentially, because, look, not to put too fine a point in it, because I know it's just a generalisation, the male experience of the world is inclusive. When things are referred to in the abstract, when we're not talking about a person in particular, when we're talking about something that could be happening to any person, the pronoun that is generally used is he. The male experience is always prioritised over the female experience. So the female experience of the world is generally to be excluded. And I love that in this book, because of the use of the pronoun she for pretty much everyone, men reading this book can get some kind of context for how women feel when the whole world around them seems to concentrate on a point of view and an experience that is not theirs. I found that wonderful, truly, truly wonderful, and I applaud Ann Leckie for doing that. Sivarden, she's 1,000 years old. She's basically been in suspended animation for 1,000 years. She is also a he, by the way, but because we mainly see Sivarden from Breck's point of view, we only hear of her through Breck as a she. And Sivarden was an officer once on Justice of Torren and was not a favourite. But Breck is familiar, and Sivarden can't understand why, but Sivarden assumes that Breck is human. That bleeds into the thing I love most about this book. Her experience is very much being an ancillary, and her understanding of being an ancillary and of being a warship is that she is not a person, because the Raj Empire do not consider ancillaries people and they do not consider warships people. So the fact that everyone around her considers that she's human, and she redefines human for them. Specifically Sivarden, who is very much a product of the Raj. Sivarden's whole understanding of humanity changes watching Breck do what she's doing. Part of it maybe is what was programmed into her as a sort of warship, as an Esk, to look after people of the Raj. But it's very much her choice to do things. Sometimes she doesn't know why she's making those choices. Sometimes she makes them without thinking about them. But it's also just her. And I loved that whole thread through it. It's a complex, beautifully coherent story. Like I said, deeply researched and deeply understood. All these cultures that Ann Leckie's written, she's deeply understood them. And she bleeds that knowledge through the story beautifully. It's seamless, it's wonderful, and I am looking forward to reading the next two in the trilogy and finding out what happens to Breck. Breck is now one of my favourite characters of all time. I have a soft spot for the non-human, sort of doing humanity better than people do. I just do. It's one of my things. Anyway, that's that. Read it. Now, next week I am doing the book set in high school. I've already read it. I chose to read The Perks of Being a Wallflower because I watched the trailer for the film and ended up crying like a baby because that whole high school thing, you know, the secondary school thing is quite raw for me still. So, and I'm almost 40. Treat people nicely at high school and secondary school, kids. Seriously. Anyway, I read the book and I have thoughts about it. It's not that I hate it. I don't. I actually really, really liked it. But I have thoughts about it. After finishing it and being impressed, I sort of thought about it a bit and I'm kind of like less impressed. But I will get to that next week. Thank you for joining me, and I hope I can actually get this down to below 10 minutes because I have waffled on a good amount of time about how awesome Breck is. But she is, and you should read Ancillary Justice because it rocks.